Vanessa Sinclair had it all: fame, fortune, and a face that lit up billboards in every major city. But behind the glamorous life of red carpets and curated smiles was a woman exhausted by the spotlight, craving something real. And David Reyes? He was as far from her world as you could imagine. A widowed single father working 2 jobs to give his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, the kind of life she deserved. His days were filled with lunchbox notes and late-night dishwashing shifts, not designer gowns or screaming paparazzi. Their worlds should never have collided. But Fatior, maybe just a rainstorm and a swarm of cameras, threw them together outside a luxury hotel one afternoon. Vanessa was trapped, cornered by flashing bulbs and yelling voices. David, simply passing by after picking up Lily from a school field trip, didn't think he acted. Shielding Vanessa with his coat, he held her hand and led her through the chaos. She didn't let go. That one moment sparked a whirlwind. As the media speculated and the public gossiped, a quiet bond formed between 2 people from opposite worlds. It wasn't easy. Cameras turned on David. Vanessa's world grew messier. But, through the noise, they found something rare: authenticity, kindness, and maybe a forever kind of love. It was the kind of gray, overcast afternoon that seemed to press down on the city like a heavy sigh. The sidewalks shimmered with the remnants of a morning rain, and people moved briskly beneath umbrellas, eager to escape the next downpour. David Reyes didn't have an umbrella. He had Lily, a pink lunchbox swinging in his hand, and a soaked backpack slung over one shoulder. He had just picked her up from her field trip, laughing as she told him about the duck that had stolen someone's sandwich. He didn't mind the weather. He'd walked through worse. What mattered was that she was smiling, and that meant everything. Vanessa Sinclair stepped out of the glossy black SUV that had dropped her off at the front of the Astoria Grand Hotel. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement. Her coat clutched tight around her, head down as the drizzle turned to sharp rain. She was used to traveling incognito, trying to avoid attention whenever she could. But there was something about today, maybe the fatigue, maybe the heaviness in her chest, that made her slower, distracted. She barely noticed the group starting to gather nearby, people peeking and whispering. She just wanted to get inside. She needed a minute to breathe, to feel like more than a product of public consumption. David noticed her because Lily noticed her first. "Daddy, that lady looks really cold," she said, tugging at his sleeve. David looked up and saw her, this tall woman in an expensive coat, standing alone in front of the hotel's steps. Something about her posture struck him. Not the beauty, though she was striking, but the stillness, the way she looked like she was holding herself together with invisible thread. Then came the commotion. A few people nearby began pulling out their phones, voices rose, and before he could think, David saw the woman Vanessa freeze like a deer caught in headlights. Her hands went up instinctively, shielding her face. Lily clutched his leg, and that was enough for him. With barely a thought, David moved forward, his voice calm but firm, placing his coat around the woman's shoulders. "Miss, come on. Let's get you out of here," he said, guiding her by the elbow. Vanessa looked up at him, startled at first, and then her hand found his. It was a small thing, but she held on not just for balance, but like she needed to believe in someone. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't gawk. He simply led her across the sidewalk, weaving through the crowd, shielding her like it was second nature. And as she slipped into the shelter of his coat, something in her chest softened, like a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding had finally been released. By the time they reached the awning of the building next door, the rain had picked up. Vanessa turned to him, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice low, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand what had just happened. "I didn't know what to do." David just shrugged, his grip loosening around her hand. "It's okay. Looked like you needed help. I've had practice 8 years of keeping this one safe," he added, nodding toward Lily, who peeked out from behind him with wide eyes. Vanessa looked down at the little girl and gave her a gentle smile. Then she looked back at David, her expression unreadable but grateful. "You saved me back there," she murmured. "I'm Vanessa." "David," he said. "And this is Lily." That was how it began, not with fireworks or grand declarations, but with a shared moment under the rain, an instinctive kindness from a stranger, and a woman who hadn't expected to find comfort in someone so unlike anyone she'd ever known. The rain didn't let up. It streaked down the windows of the small cafe David had ducked into with Vanessa and Lily, its quiet warmth a welcome escape from the intensity of the street. They sat at a corner table, steam rising from mugs of cocoa, the scent of cinnamon and fresh bread weaving around them like a comforting blanket. Vanessa looked slightly out of place in her designer coat and silk scarf, but her posture had relaxed. Her shoulders weren't pulled so tight anymore. She kept glancing at Lily, who was cheerfully blowing bubbles into her cocoa, and then at David, as though trying to piece together exactly who he was and how he had so effortlessly stepped into the storm to protect someone like her. "You really didn't recognize me?" she asked. Curiosity laced through her voice like a thread of tension she hadn't yet dropped. David smiled politely and shook his head. "Nope, I don't watch much TV. Most of my time goes into this one," he said, gesturing to Lily, "and making sure she doesn't turn the apartment into a science experiment." Vanessa laughed softly, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a while. It wasn't performative. It wasn't charming. It was real. "You have no idea how refreshing that is," she admitted, curling her hands around her cup. "Most people either want a selfie or to pitch me something." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at her thoughtfully and said, "You look scared back there. Not just surprise scared. That's what made me step in." Vanessa blinked, caught off guard by how directly he'd seen her. She wasn't used to being read so clearly. Usually, people only saw the surface. The flawless skin, the perfect smile, the headlines. But he had noticed the fear, and he had moved, not because of who she was, but because she was human in need of help. "I guess I just froze," she admitted. "Sometimes it all gets too loud." David nodded. "I get that. Life can be a lot, especially when it won't leave you alone." Their eyes met across the table. There was something unspoken therein, understanding, a thread of recognition between two people from opposite ends of the spectrum who'd both carried weight in silence. David wasn't wealthy. He wasn't famous. But he knew pressure. He knew sacrifice. And maybe that's why Vanessa kept sitting there, sipping cocoa beside a man she'd only just met, while his daughter chartered happily beside her. When they stood to leave, the sky had begun to clear, streaks of orange painting the horizon. Vanessa hesitated outside the cafe, looking unsure for the first time. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. For earlier, David looked at her with the same calm, steady expression. "You don't need to. Just take care of yourself." She gave a faint smile, then knelt beside Lily. "It was really nice meeting you, sweetheart." Lily grinned. "You too. Daddy's cocoa is always best on rainy days." Vanessa stood again, her eyes still on David. "Maybe I could repay you with a better cup sometime. Just not one with bubbles in it." David chuckled. "We'll see. Stay dry out there." As Vanessa walked away, still wrapped in his coat, David stood silently on the sidewalk, watching her disappear into the fading mist. He didn't know it yet, but something had shifted. That day had changed everything. And though neither of them could see the road ahead, they both carried a warmth from that simple exchange that would keep them looking back, and slowly, inevitably, forward. Vanessa had returned his coat the next morning, not through a courier or her assistant, but in person. She showed up on the sidewalk outside the elementary school, where David dropped Lily off, a paper bag in hand and a small, uncertain smile on her lips. He had been crouching to tie Lily's shoelace when he noticed the familiar silhouette out of the corner of his eye-long coat, sunglasses, and unmistakable poise. "I figured cocoa and kindness deserve more than a text," she said, lifting the bag as she approached. Inside were 2 blueberry muffins from the upscale bakery downtown, ones David could never justify buying on his budget. He stood slowly, unsure of what to say, but Lily lit up. "Hi, Miss Vanessa," she chirped, already treating her like an old friend. Vanessa smiled, kneeling down so they were face to face. "Hi, sweetheart. You heading into class?" "Yup, we're making volcanoes today," Lily's excitement spilled out in a burst of energy. Then she gave David a quick hug and dashed off toward the school doors, waving as she went. Vanessa and David stood in silence for a moment. It wasn't awkward, just unexpectedly full. She extended the bag toward him again. "These are for you. And thank you again for everything." David took the bag, glancing down with a grateful nod. "You didn't have to." "I know," she replied softly. "But I wanted to." As the week went on, small moments began to unfold, like pages of a story neither of them had planned to start. A text here, a brief call there. Then one evening, when Vanessa found herself near David's neighborhood after a late shoot, she called on impulse and asked if she could stop by. "I've had enough of catered platters and silence," she said. "Do you and Lily want pizza?" That night, they ate greasy pepperoni slices on paper plates, while Lily recited facts about volcanoes. Vanessa laughed so hard she nearly spilled her soda when David made a face at Lily's impression of an erupting mountain. It was easy. It was human. It was unlike anything in her regular world of velvet ropes and rehearsed interactions. As the night wore on, David walked her to her car. There was no rain this time, but as they stood on the curb, Vanessa reached for his hand. It wasn't dramatic or symbolic. It was simple, a gesture of trust and maybe longing. His fingers curled around hers without hesitation. "You have a calm about you," she said quietly, "like nothing phases you." David gave a soft laugh. "Try raising a kid on your own. You either learn calm or lose your mind." She smiled, her eyes flicking to their joined hands. "I like that you don't ask me questions. You just let things be." He looked at her then, really looked. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is not press them to speak until they're ready. She nodded slowly, then let go, her fingers trailing off his. But something lingered. A connection, a shared understanding. And when she drove away, David found himself standing under the street lamp longer than he needed to, hands still warm from where hers had rested. 3 days later, the storm returned, not the one in the sky, but in the world Vanessa had grown up navigating. Her appearance at a fashion event had sparked questions. Who was the man she'd been seen with? Was it a romance? A scandal? Vanessa, used to living behind walls of polished answers and strategic silence, felt those walls wobble the moment she saw the line of photographers waiting outside the building. She hadn't expected them. She'd just wanted to attend a friend's charity gala. But the moment she stepped from the car, it was clear her anonymity was gone. Her first instinct was to retreat, but then she spotted a familiar car, David's battered old sedan, humming at the corner. She hadn't called for him. She hadn't even told him she was coming to this event. But somehow, he'd known, and he was there. Without a second thought, Vanessa slipped past the entrance and crossed the pavement, ducking into the car like it was a lifeboat. David glanced at her, one brow raised. "Didn't look like you wanted to be there." "I didn't," she said, breathless. "I just didn't want to look like I was running." "Well," he said, shifting into gear, "running's not always the wrong call." The ride was quiet at first. The rain tapped against the windshield, soft and rhythmic. Vanessa stared ahead, then turned to him. "You came without me asking. Why?" David didn't take his eyes off the road. "I figured you might need someone who doesn't want anything from you." Vanessa looked at him, studying the profile of a man who didn't flinch in her presence, who didn't try to impress or pry or manipulate. "You're not like anyone I know." "That's probably for the best," he replied with a half-smile. She laughed, not because it was particularly funny, but because it reminded her she could. "You're not afraid of me?" David finally glanced over, his tone steady. "Should I be?" She shook her head. "No, that's just it. Most people treat me like a symbol or a threat. You treat me like I'm normal." "You are normal," he said simply. "You're just tired. And being tired doesn't make you any less human." She turned back toward the window, her voice softer now. "I don't remember the last time someone talked to me like this." David didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The car rumbled quietly through the streets until they reached her Homean, elegant, sprawling estate surrounded by gates and stone. He parked by the curb, but before she stepped out, she looked at him again. "Would you like to come in?" He hesitated. Not because he didn't want to, but because stepping into her world felt like a different kind of threshold. Still, he nodded. Sure, I've got a little time. Inside, the mansion was beautiful, but cold in the way expensive spaces often are. Yet, as they walked through it, talking and laughing in pockets of warmth and stillness, something shifted. For the first time in a long while, Vanessa wasn't wearing a mask, and David wasn't a guest, was simply present. By the end of the night, neither wanted to admit how quickly the walls between them had begun to fade. It wasn't long before the contrast between their lives became impossible to ignore. David lived in a second-floor walk-up with creaky floors and a stove that didn't light without a match. Vanessa lived in a home with voice-activated lighting and a staff of people who managed her schedule. He made dinner with canned tomatoes and leftover pasta. She had chefs who planned meals a week in advance. On paper, they didn't fit. But in reality, it wasn't about paper. One Saturday morning, Vanessa showed up at David's apartment wearing jeans, sneakers, and a ball cap pulled low. He was in the kitchen, trying to salvage a pancake that had folded in on itself when Lily barreled into the living room screaming, "Miss Vanessa's here!" He emerged with batter on his hands and a grin. "You're brave. Not many willingly step into my chaos." Vanessa laughed. "I wanted to see what normal Saturday mornings feel like." He handed her a mug of lukewarm coffee. Normal means slightly burnt pancakes and at least one Lego injury before noon. She sipped it without flinching. Perfect. They sat together in the small kitchen, sunlight spilling across the scratch table, while Lily built towers on the floor. Vanessa watched the father-daughter duo with a soft, unreadable expression. She wasn't used to this kind of intimacy. The messiness, the unscripted moments. Yet here, in a space that smelled like syrup and sounded like laughter, she felt more grounded than she had in years. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed and the city lights blinked outside the window, Vanessa turned to David. "Do you ever feel like you were meant for something bigger?" she asked. David shook his head. "No, I think I was meant for something small but meaningful. Raising Lily. Being here. That's enough for me." She looked at him, something tender blooming in her eyes. "That's what makes you so rare." Their differences were still their class, background, the expectations placed on their shoulders by the lives they led. But in the quiet between words, in the way they shared silence without discomfort, they realized something simple and powerful. Sometimes, two people from different worlds meet not to change each other, but to remind each other of what truly matters. And as Vanessa rested her head on David's shoulder that night, she wasn't thinking about the headlines or the money. She was thinking about burnt pancakes, Lego towers, and the way his hand had found hers steady, unafraid, and impossibly real. Chapter 6. The Girl Behind the Fame. Vanessa's face was everywhere. Billboards, beauty campaigns, and magazine covers, but the woman behind the smile rarely got to speak. With David, though, she didn't have to perform. It started with a walk in the park on a crisp afternoon. Lily ran ahead, chasing birds, while David and Vanessa strolled slowly behind. The sky was open and blue, the kind of day that made you forget to check your phone. Vanessa tugged her jacket tighter and said, almost out of nowhere, "I used to love places like this before the world decided who I had to be." David looked over at her but didn't push. He just waited. She glanced at him, then away, as though weighing whether she was allowed to be honest. "It started when I was 15. A scout saw me at a cafe with my mom. Next thing I knew, I was doing photo shoots, traveling alone, being told how to look, how to stand, how to smile. Everyone wanted me to be something. No one asked me what I wanted." He nodded slowly, sensing this wasn't something she said often. "What did you want?" Her answer came in a whisper. "To feel seen, not looked at seen." They walked in silence for a while, the breeze tugging at the hem of her coat. She continued, her voice steadier now. "My mom thought it was a dream. She pushed me into every opportunity, thinking it would lead to happiness. But all it led to was control. Agents, stylists, managers, they all had a say in my life. And if I pushed back, I was difficult, emotional. They made me feel like I was ungrateful for not loving the life they built around me." David's hands were tucked in his pockets, but his voice was warm. "Sounds like you've been carrying a lot alone." She nodded, her eyes tracing Lily's path ahead of them. "I have. That's why I disappear sometimes. That's why I don't answer calls. I'm not trying to be cold. I need room to breathe." David didn't tell her it was okay. He didn't offer some tidy phrase or pretend to understand the weight of her world. Instead, he just walked beside her, steady, present. And when she finally stopped and looked at him, he said, "You don't have to explain yourself to me. You're allowed to just be." Her eyes misted, not with sadness, but with the quiet shock of being accepted without condition. That day, in the middle of a park filled with laughter and wind, Vanessa Sinclair was not a brand or a name or a face. She was a woman, finally allowed to be soft, to be human. And David, just by being himself, gave her the space to remember who she was beneath it all. The first time Vanessa saw David tuck Lily into bed, she stood quietly in the hallway, watching through the half-open door. Lily was surrounded by stuffed animals and twinkling fairy lights, her favorite book resting on her chest. David sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, his voice low and full of tenderness, as he promised her sweet dreams. Vanessa felt something stir in her warmth that surprised her with its depth. Later that evening, they sat together on the couch, the glow of the lamp casting soft shadows. Vanessa picked up one of Lily's forgotten toys from the coffee table and turned it in her hands. "She's amazing, so full of light." David smiled. "She's my reason for everything. After her mom passed, I didn't know if I'd be enough, but I promised her I'd try, every single day." Vanessa looked at him with a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something closer to awe. "You don't just try, you show up, completely. That's rare." He shrugged, modest as always. "I mess up like everyone else, but she knows I'm here no matter what." Vanessa leaned back against the cushions, letting the silence stretch comfortably between them. "My father left when I was 6. I don't remember him, just the echo of disappointment in my mother's voice. Watching you with Lily, it makes me wonder what it would have been like to grow up with that kind of love." David didn't say anything right away. Instead, he reached for her hand, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "You deserve that kind of love, Vanessa. You still do." Her breath hitched, not because of the words, but because of how easily he believed them. She had been told she was loved by people who wanted something from her. But David's love, though he hadn't said, it felt different. It wasn't flashy or conditional. It was steady, like the way he poured syrup on Lily's pancakes or remembered her favorite bedtime story. That night, after she had gone home, Vanessa sat alone in her sprawling bedroom, staring out the window. Her world was built on appearance, but David had reminded her that love didn't need to be loud to be real. It could be quiet and firm and unshakable. And maybe, just maybe, that kind of love was what she had been missing all along. Vanessa showed up unannounced on a Sunday morning, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, holding a brown paper bag of groceries. David opened the door, surprised but amused. "You grocery shop now?" "I'm a woman of many talents," she replied, grinning. "Besides, I wanted to see how you really live." David stepped aside, letting her in with a nod. "Well, you're in luck. Sunday's chore day. You can help with dishes or laundry dealer's choice." She laughed, already rolling up her sleeves. "I'm better at folding." The day unfolded in layers. Vanessa helped make grilled cheese sandwiches while Lily built a puzzle on the floor. The apartment was small, and everything echoed slightly, but it was filled with the sounds of real-life pots clanging, giggles from the living room, and David humming to himself as he sorted laundry. Vanessa found herself enjoying every minute of it. They danced in the kitchen when Lily played music from her tablet. They argued playfully over how much pepper belonged in scrambled eggs. David showed her how to change a light bulb that kept flickering, and she showed him how to make a proper vinaigrette. By late afternoon, the three of them collapsed on the couch, exhausted and happy. Vanessa looked around the room and whispered, "I think this is the most peace I've felt in years." David tilted his head toward her. "It's not fancy, but it's home." She turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. That's what makes it beautiful. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The connection was in the shared looks, the unspoken ease, the way Vanessa helped Lily pick out pajamas without being asked. She belonged there not because of who she was in the outside world, but because of who she was becoming in this one. Later that night, as David stood at the door while she slipped her shoes back on, she looked up at him and smiled. "Thank you for letting me be part of your world today." He returned the smile, warm and sincere. "You're always welcome, Vanessa." And as she walked down the stairs, her heart felt light. The mansion would be waiting for her, with its polished surfaces and empty halls. But she realized something that stopped her on the sidewalk home wasn't about where you lived, it was about who made you feel like you belonged. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's story. She felt like she was finally writing her own. It started with a blurry photo. David hadn't even known it had been taken, just a snapshot of him holding Vanessa's hand outside the grocery store. Lily at his side with a paper bag full of cereal and apples. It was innocent, ordinary even. But the moment it hit the celebrity blogs, it became something else entirely. The headline was loud and unmistakable. Vanessa Sinclair's mystery man, a single dad from nowhere. The internet devoured the story. Talk shows speculated. Comment sections exploded. People combed through David's social media, uncovering fragments of his life-old birthday posts for Lily, photos from school recitals, a video of him singing off-key at her 8th birthday. What had once been private became public within days. David didn't say anything when he first saw the article. He was making Lily's lunch just another Tuesday morning when his phone buzzed with a message from a coworker. He clicked the link and stared, unmoving, as the words blurred together. His name, his face, his daughter's name out there, available to anyone who wanted it. It felt like the air had been knocked out of him. He didn't call Vanessa. He didn't need to. She showed up at his door that evening, out of breath, her coat barely buttoned. "David, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would happen so fast." He looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't do this." "But it's because of me," she insisted, stepping inside. "They're invading your life now, Lily's life, and I can't stop it." David exhaled, rubbing a hand across the back of his neck. "I've always kept her safe. That's been my job since the day her mom died. I don't know how to protect her from this." Vanessa sat down on the couch, her voice soft. "Then let me help." He shook his head slowly. "This isn't your burden to carry." "But it is," she said, eyes shining with emotion. "I brought this storm to your doorstep, and I won't walk away just because it's messy now." He sat beside her, exhaustion etched into his face. "You don't owe us anything." Her voice was barely a whisper. "It's not about owing, David. It's about choosing." That night, while Lily played in her room, the two of them talked through the chaos. Vanessa offered to hire someone to help monitor online mentions, to issue takedown requests, to create a buffer between David and the noise. He refused at first, too proud, too used to doing it all alone, but eventually he saw that her offer wasn't a pity. It was care. It was respect. Still, the headlines lingered. Rumors twisted their story. Commentators dissected their every move. And while David tried to keep Lily shielded from the worst of it, he could see the change. The cautious glances from other parents at school pickup, the whispered conversations when they walked through the park. What hurt the most wasn't the attention, it was the fear creeping into Lily's eyes when she asked, "Daddy, why are people talking about us?" He knelt down and hugged her tightly. "Because some people don't understand what's real, baby. But we do, and I won't let anyone change that." And even though Vanessa had brought the spotlight into his life, he couldn't deny that she also brought light comfort, strength, and a determination to face it with him instead of disappearing. For the first time in a long time, David realized he didn't have to fight every battle alone. The storm didn't pass. It grew stronger. Reporters began waiting outside David's apartment. Neighbors grew uncomfortable. One even left a note under his door suggesting he moved to avoid bringing drama into the building. Lily's teacher gently mentioned that the other parents were asking questions. And through it all, David remained steady outwardly at least. Inside, though, he felt the walls closing in. He wasn't used to this kind of scrutiny. His life had always been small, private, centered on simple things. Morning routines, packed lunches, bedtime stories. Now even those were at risk. He didn't want to drag Lily through it. And he didn't want Vanessa to have to keep explaining herself to the press. The pressure built like a wave, ready to crash. So one evening, after Lily had gone to bed and Vanessa had arrived with takeout and her usual hopeful smile, David met her at the door with something she hadn't expected: distance. "I think we need to take a step back," he said, voice low and steady. Vanessa's smile faltered. "What?" "This attention, it's hurting Lily. It's turning our life upside down." She stared at him, stunned. "David, I didn't ask for this either, but I want to fix it. I want to stand with you, not apart." He shook his head. "You can't fix this. You don't know what it's like trying to explain to your daughter why strangers are talking about her family." Vanessa swallowed hard, hurt flashing in her eyes. "You think I haven't had to explain things I didn't understand to a camera? To people who never saw me as a person? I know what it's like to be picked apart." "I know you do," he said gently. "But I've spent so long protecting her. I can't risk her safety or peace, no matter what we feel." Vanessa was quiet for a long time, standing in his doorway with the bag of food still in her hands. Then she stepped forward and placed it on the counter, her voice trembling. "You think walking away is protecting her, but what if it's not? What if showing her that love is worth fighting for is the better way?" David didn't respond. He couldn't. The fear inside him was louder than reason, louder than hope. Vanessa looked at him one last time, then turned and left, the silence between them thicker than any argument. Days passed. He kept things quiet, routine, safe, but it felt hollow. The laughter was dimmer. The meals felt colder. And when Lily asked, "Is Miss Vanessa okay?" he didn't know how to answer. Then, a week later, he got a call. It wasn't Vanessa. It was Lily's school. She had refused to speak in class, sitting silent with her head down. When David arrived to pick her up, she burst into tears the moment she saw him. Why did she leave? He held her tightly, the truth weighing on his heart. "Because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." "But I liked her," Lily whispered. "She made everything better." That night, David sat in the dark, after putting Lily to bed, staring at his phone. Vanessa hadn't reached out. He hadn't either. But he thought about what she'd said about standing together, about fighting for what mattered. He realized that in trying to shield his daughter from pain, he had taken away something that brought her joy. And in the process, he had broken something fragile and precious. He picked up the phone. It was time to stop running. Vanessa didn't answer the first call, or the second. But on the third, she picked up with a quiet, cautious, "Hello?" the kind of tone that guarded the heart behind it. David sat in his car just outside her estate, fingers tight around the steering wheel. The words came slower than he'd rehearsed, steadier than he felt. "I messed up," he said. "I let fear win." There was silence on the other end, then the softest reply, "I know." David exhaled, resting his head briefly against the steering wheel. "You were right. I thought I was protecting Lily by stepping away, but she's hurting more without you. I see it in her face. I feel it every day. I didn't realize what you meant to both of us until you weren't there." Vanessa's voice was barely audible. "I didn't want to make your life harder, David. I just wanted to be part of it." "You didn't make it harder," he said. "You made it feel fuller, brighter. I was so used to handling everything on my own, I forgot that letting someone in doesn't mean I'm failing. It means I'm strong enough to share the weight." There was another pause, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of thought, of emotion carefully unfolding. Finally, Vanessa said, "Then come here, but not to talk, just come." He was already at her gate. Inside, she met him with that same mix of grace and vulnerability that had always made her different. She didn't try to look flawless this Timeno makeup. No gloss, just Vanessa. And he saw her, truly saw her, more than ever before. They sat on the balcony overlooking the quiet stretch of city below. She turned toward him, eyes glistening. I don't need the world's approval, David. I've lived under that spotlight for too long. But with you, Lily, I felt like I belonged. Like I didn't have to prove anything. He reached for her hand, this time not in rescue or reflex, but in choice. Vanessa gripped it tight, her voice slow and clear. They're still watching, still talking. I know, he said, but we don't have to hide. Not from them, not from each other. The next day, they walked through the park together. No disguises, no hiding. David on one side, Lily on the other, and Vanessa in the middle, holding both their hands. The press was there, scattered at a distance. And when one photographer shouted her name, Vanessa turned slightly and didn't let go of David's hand. She smiled, not the smile of a woman performing, but the smile of someone finally free. And with that simple act, she made her choice visible to the world. Spring came in quietly, with soft winds and trees just beginning to bud. On a hill outside the city, where the sky met open green fields, David spread out a blanket and watched as Lily raced ahead with a kite in her hands, her laughter soaring as high as the ribbons trailing behind her. Vanessa sat beside him, her hand in his, no cameras, no schedule, just space to breathe. It had been weeks since they'd stepped into the spotlight together. The noise hadn't vanished, but it had faded into the background, where it belonged. What stayed, what endured, was the bond between them, no longer built on fragile moments, but on days lived side by side. Grocery runs, dance nights in the kitchen, homework help, quiet talks after Lily went to bed. Vanessa had started spending more nights in David's apartment than her mansion. She said the silence in her estate echoed too much. But more than that, she said it was because Lily's goodnight hugs and the smell of cinnamon toast in the morning made her feel like she'd finally come home. Now, as they watched the little girl twirl across the field, Vanessa leaned her head on David's shoulder. She's happy again, she said softly. You gave her that. We gave her that, he replied, brushing his thumb over her hand. Vanessa turned to look at him, the wind catching strands of her hair. You know, I used to think love was something loud, flashy, overwhelming. But with you, it's quiet, it's steady, it doesn't demand, it just is. David smiled, lifting her hand to his lips. Sometimes the quiet ones last the longest. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box knot. Flashy, not grand, but thoughtful. Inside was a handmade bracelet, crafted by Lily, with 3 initials, D, V, and L. David looked at it and swallowed hard, emotion rising. She wanted to give it to you herself, Vanessa said, but I asked her if I could, because I need you to know something. David looked at her, eyes already brimming. Vanessa held his gaze, voice firm. You are not my escape. You're my anchor. You're the place I want to return to again and again. You're not just the man who protected me that day. You're the man who showed me I didn't have to face life alone. She paused, her fingers threading through his. David Reyes, you are my home. You are my forever. He didn't respond with a speech. He didn't need to. He pulled her into his arms, held her like the world had finally aligned. And in the distance, Lily shouted, You guys are hugging again. Gross. They laughed together, surrounded by wind and laughter, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be announced, because it's already understood. Not born in fairy tales or fame, but built in trust, in patience, and in the brave decision to hold someone's hand and never let go.